The storm raged like a living thing, battering the small cabin perched on the outskirts of town. The wind howled, sending tendrils of cold air sneaking through cracks in the windows. Rain slashed against the glass, the sound like 1,000 tiny fists beating relentlessly at the door. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, casting flickering shadows across the room. But the atmosphere was thick with more than just the weight of the storm outside. It was the tension that clung to the space, a lingering heaviness that made the air feel too thick to breathe. Ethan sat alone in front of the hearth, nursing a glass of bourbon, his gaze far away. His life had become an endless loop of solitude. Work, sleep, repeat. The quiet had become his companion, his refuge. He had always enjoyed the peace of being alone, the calm that came with not having to answer to anyone, not having to explain himself. But tonight something felt different. The storm outside wasn't just a storm. It felt like a warning, a prelude to something inevitable. Ethan could feel it in his bones, the subtle shift in the air, like the world was holding its breath. He glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. The power had flickered once, twice, and then settled into an eerie hum. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Then, there was a knock at the door. The sound wasn't normal. It was urgent, insistent. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the room. Ethan froze, his hand still holding the glass, the amber liquid swaying gently. He looked toward the door, wondering if he'd heard it right. Another knock, louder this time, almost demanding. His heart skipped, a pulse of adrenaline surging through him. Who would be out there in a storm like this? Against his better judgment, he stood, setting the glass down with a clink. The wind outside howled again, rattling the windows. A flicker of movement in the corner of his eye, the shadow of a figure just beyond the threshold. His hand brushed the cold metal of the doorknob, and for a split second, he hesitated. Something about this felt off, something instinctive that he couldn't place. But curiosity, that dangerous thing, pushed him forward. He opened the door. She stood there, drenched, a silhouette framed by the storm's fury. Long, dark hair clung to her face, rain streaking down her cheeks like tears. Her eyes glowed, no, shimmered, a soft, unnatural light in the dark. For a moment, Ethan wondered if he was seeing things. I need help, she said, her voice trembling, not from the cold but something deeper, something more primal. It wasn't an accent he could place. Her words were clipped, urgent. Please! Ethan's gaze flicked over her, the immediate concern for her safety quickly overshadowed by the strange intensity that radiated from her. She was tall, willowy, with sharp features that held an elegance beyond human norms. Her skin was pale, almost ethereal against the storm's dark backdrop. She looked out of place, like a creature pulled from another world entirely. Are you okay? Ethan asked, his voice gruff, his instincts battling the overwhelming urge to slam the door shut and lock himself in. I need to come inside, she pressed, stepping forward with the determination of someone who had no other option. I don't have much time. Ethan, caught between caution and the instinct to help, reluctantly stepped aside. As she crossed the threshold, her presence seemed to fill the room, filling the empty spaces with an energy that was almost electric. She smelled faintly of something floral, something unfamiliar, as though her very being carried a fragrance from somewhere else. He shut the door behind her, but something in the air remained unsettled. Who? What are you? He asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Her gaze met his, and for the first time, he saw the depth of her eyes, unnaturally bright, glowing with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. The moment their eyes locked, his heart skipped, the room seeming to shrink in on itself. She exhaled softly, a sigh filled with a weight that was almost too much to bear. I'm not from here, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos that still seemed to pulse from her. And I don't have much time to explain. Ethan felt a chill creep up his spine as he studied her. There was something strange about her, a quiet strength, an aura of power that was almost intoxicating. She moved with a grace that didn't quite belong in this world, every step measured and deliberate. She wasn't just a woman, she was something else entirely. Something alien. I don't understand. Ethan murmured, stepping back, his body still wary, though his curiosity was piqued. What do you want from me? Her gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw vulnerability there, something that felt all too human. But then, just as quickly it was gone, replaced by the steely resolve that she'd carried with her from the beginning. I need you to trust me, she said, her voice low but firm. The fate of my world depends on it. The words hung in the air, thick with implication, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt the ground beneath him shift. His heart hammered in his chest as he studied her, the space between them heavy with unspoken questions. But before he could say anything, she stepped forward again, closing the distance between them. Her eyes never left his, the pull between them undeniable. A sense of urgency surged through him, something primal, something ancient, and in that moment, he realized that nothing would ever be the same. Do you trust me? She asked, her voice a mere whisper now. Ethan swallowed, his pulse quickening. He didn't know what it was about her beauty, her mystery, the unshakable conviction in her words, but in that moment, he felt an unfamiliar sensation coursing through him, one that left no room for doubt. I don't know what you are, but I can't leave you out there, he said, his voice barely a murmur. Come in. As she stepped closer, the storm raged on outside. Inside, the air grew thick with the weight of a decision neither of them could yet comprehend. The fire crackled softly, the only sound in the otherwise silent cabin, save for the occasional roar of the wind outside. Ethan stared at the woman across from him, still unsure of what to make of her. She had shed her soaked jacket and draped it over the back of a chair, revealing a sleek black outfit that hugged her form like a second skin. It was a simple garment, but it felt alien in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Its texture shimmered faintly, as if it were alive, shifting with the light in ways that made it difficult to focus on. Her eyes, the same luminous, otherworldly glow, never left his face. He could feel them, sharp and steady, like they were peeling back the layers of him. You haven't asked me my name, she said quietly, her voice almost a hum, blending with the low sounds of the storm outside. Ethan blinked, momentarily snapped from his thoughts. I didn't want to, he replied, the words coming out with more edge than he intended. But the truth was, he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Not yet. He wasn't even sure he wanted to keep talking to her. But something beyond reason, urged him to stay. Maybe it was the storm, or maybe it was the fact that his world had just been ripped apart, revealing a side of reality that was far more complicated than he had ever believed. Her lips curved into a soft, knowing smile. You will soon enough, she said, as if she understood exactly what he was thinking. Ethan shifted uneasily, his fingers playing with the rim of his glass. I've been around long enough to know when I'm in over my head, he muttered. Then you're already halfway to understanding, she replied. Her tone was calm, serene, as if she had all the time in the world. But the rest will take longer. Ethan studied her carefully. Her calm demeanor only made the air around her feel even heavier, as if she were a presence that didn't quite belong in this world. I don't get it, he said, his voice low, a tightness in his chest threatening to break free. What do you want from me? Why come here, in the middle of all this? Her eyes softened slightly, as if she'd been expecting this question. I came because you are the one. And I can't do this without you. Ethan raised an eyebrow. The one? What does that even mean? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood and moved toward the window, her back to him. Outside, the storm had intensified, and the wind howled through the trees, bending them almost impossibly. The scene should have felt unsettling, yet there was a strange sense of stillness in the way she observed it. It means, she began slowly, that you hold the key to my survival. To my world's survival. There is no other path but the one I came to find. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. His mind whirled, trying to grasp what she was saying. Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I can't. I'm not playing, she interjected, turning to face him, her gaze more intense than ever. And this isn't a game, This is life and death. My world, it's dying. It's collapsing, and the reason is because of a bond that's been severed. A bond that, until tonight, no one believed could ever be mended. But you can fix it. Ethan's mind was racing, but he couldn't make sense of her words. His hands clenched around the glass. I don't understand. How am I supposed to fix anything? I'm just a man? She finished the sentence for him, and her tone softened, almost fondly. No, Ethan. You're so much more than that. And whether you believe it or not, I am here because of you. Because you are the one who can help me restore what was lost. The room felt suddenly warmer, as if the air itself were thick with the weight of what she was saying. Ethan could feel the temperature change around him, his skin growing uncomfortably hot. He tried to breathe through the wave of confusion, but it was like he was drowning in it. He ran a hand through his hair. Look, he said, struggling to steady his thoughts. I don't know what you're talking about. What bond? What world? And what makes you think I'm the right person to help you? Her gaze flicked to his, her eyes flashing with a mixture of sorrow and something darker. I didn't want to tell you like this, but I have no choice. Ethan's pulse quickened. She wasn't just talking about some grand cosmic plan. No, there was something personal in her voice, something almost desperate. I'm not from here, she said slowly, her words almost feeling like a confession. I'm from a place far beyond your world. A place where we once lived in harmony. But that harmony was broken. A curse was laid upon my people, and the only way to lift it is to restore the bond between us. Ethan narrowed his eyes, the disbelief written clearly on his face. So what? I'm supposed to be the savior of some alien race? The words sounded absurd, even to him. And yet, her expression didn't falter. She nodded solemnly. Yes. That's exactly what I'm asking you to do. Because the truth is, you're not just any man, Ethan. You're the one chosen to make the sacrifice. And in return, you'll have the power to change everything. Her words echoed in his mind, but they didn't make sense. Ethan could feel a tightness in his chest, like his very soul was being pulled towards something he couldn't understand. The words she spoke, so earnest, so unwavering, wore down the walls he'd built around himself. She wasn't trying to deceive him. No, it was as if she believed everything she said. You're asking me to believe that I'm special? Ethan scoffed, leaning back in his chair. That somehow I'm the key to saving your entire world? Yes, she said, her voice unwavering. And in doing so, you'll find your place in this universe. You'll understand who you truly are. But first, you must trust me. Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of her words crashing over him like a wave. He had spent his life running from trust, from connection. Yet here he was, sitting in front of a woman who, despite everything, felt more real than anything he had ever known. He took a deep breath, his chest tightening. I don't know if I can trust you, he whispered, the admission hanging between them. But something about this, about you, feels like the only truth I've known. The storm outside raged on, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan's heart felt like it had found a rhythm in the chaos. But what price would he have to pay to truly understand it? The morning light slanted through the cabin's frosted windows, casting soft beams onto the wooden floor. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world blanketed in a pristine layer of snow, untouched and serene. But inside, Ethan could feel the heavy air, the kind that clung to the skin, tight and thick, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. He sat at the table, absently tapping his fingers against the polished wood, lost in thought. His mind raced with everything he had learned over the past few hours. Everything he had been told. And still, nothing made sense. She had told him, no, insisted, that he was the key. He wasn't just any man, he was the one who could restore an ancient bond that would save her people. Her world. The idea sounded absurd. But in the depth of her gaze, there was something real. Too real. The way she had spoken, the quiet conviction in her voice, it felt impossible to ignore. Ethan took a deep breath and stood, walking to the window. The crisp, biting air outside was a sharp contrast to the thick warmth of the room, but the peace outside only intensified the chaos inside his mind. A light knock on the door broke his reverie. He didn't need to ask who it was. He could feel her presence long before the sound reached his ears. "Come in," he said, his voice flat, tired. The door opened, and she stepped in, the same quiet grace as before. Her name still lingered on his tongue, Lyra. The name felt as foreign as the things she had revealed. But it was her, undeniably. Her presence, her energy, it wasn't of this world. Not in the way he understood it, at least. "You're up early," she observed, her tone a mixture of softness and something more ancient, hidden beneath the surface. Ethan turned to face her, his eyes scanning her face. She hadn't changed overnight, but something about her seemed different. Sharper, maybe. The weight of their conversation the night before lingered between them, thick like a fog that neither of them could cut through. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I can't stop thinking about what you said." Her gaze didn't waver, the intensity of it pulling him in as she closed the door behind her with a soft click. "I understand. What I've asked of you isn't simple. But it's the only way." Ethan sighed, stepping back from the window. "The only way to what? To fix the universe? To—" He shook his head, running out of words. The enormity of what she had suggested was almost too much to bear. She approached him, each step deliberate, and the air seemed to change, thickening with something unspoken. He could feel her power now, just under the surface. It wasn't physical, but something deeper, something more primordial. Something he didn't fully understand. "I'm not asking you to fix the universe," she said softly. "Just to fix this one thing. My people, we were once united with your kind. We shared a bond, a power that connected us. But it was broken, and now, my world is unraveling." Ethan looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of deceit. But all he found was vulnerability, something raw, something human. "Your world," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "You are from another world. I don't understand. How is that even possible?" Lyra nodded slowly, stepping closer. "I've already told you I'm not from here, Ethan. I came to your world because you are the one who can restore what was lost. I couldn't do it alone." The way she said it, it wasn't a request. It was a statement of truth, of something that had already been decided long before their paths had crossed. Ethan couldn't wrap his mind around it. He was just a man, a flawed, normal human. Nothing extraordinary. Yet here she was, telling him he was the key to something he couldn't even begin to comprehend. "Why me?" The question hung between them, raw and trembling. "Why not anyone else? Why not someone stronger? Smarter?" Her eyes softened, the familiar, knowing look returning. "Because of your heart," she said simply. "The bond we need to restore, it's not about strength. It's about connection. And you are someone who can still feel. That's rare, Ethan. Rarer than you realize." Ethan felt a strange flush of warmth rise in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was from the heat of her words or something deeper. It didn't make sense, but then again, none of this did. Lyra stepped forward, her gaze never leaving his. "I know you're scared," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "And I know you don't trust me. But I need you to understand, if we fail, everything will fall apart. The very fabric of my world will disintegrate." She was so close now, so close that he could feel the faint hum of energy in the air around them. He had the sudden urge to reach out, to touch her, to see if this strange pull he felt was real. "I don't know what you want from me," he said, his voice suddenly rough. "I don't know if I can help you." Her hand reached out, gentle but firm, and she placed it over his, where it rested on the table. The touch was electric, like a spark had ignited deep within him, setting fire to something inside. It was as if the connection between them had become real in that single moment. "You don't have to understand it all right now," she said softly. "You just have to trust that together, we can restore what was lost." The price of failure is too high. And the price of success. She paused, as if weighing her words carefully. The price of success is something you will have to decide for yourself. Ethan stared at her hand, his pulse hammering in his ears. The weight of what she was asking hung in the air, like a storm waiting to break. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, torn between fear and something else, something he wasn't ready to confront. So, what happens now? He asked, his voice barely audible. Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of relief and something darker. No, she said softly. We take the first step. She released his hand, but the heat of her touch lingered, like an ember that had burned too deep to extinguish. As she stepped back, Ethan could feel the world around him shift. Nothing was the same. And maybe, for the first time in his life, he was ready to step into the unknown. But at what cost? Outside, the winds had picked up again, a low moan echoing through the trees. The storm wasn't finished. And neither were they. The cabin had grown eerily silent as the storm outside raged on, a constant roar of wind and snow swirling in the world beyond. Ethan stood at the edge of the room, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts, each one colliding with the next. Lyra's words still echoed in his mind, and with each passing second, the weight of her request seemed heavier. The unknown stretched before him, dark and unfathomable. You need to prepare, Lyra said, her voice breaking through his thoughts. Her presence was as unyielding as the storm outside, her gaze sharp but tender, as if she knew exactly what he was thinking. As if she could read his mind. Ethan swallowed, trying to find his voice, but his throat felt tight. Prepare? For what? Her expression softened, her eyes never leaving his. We are going to take the first step, she repeated, the words thick with meaning. There's no going back once we start, Ethan. You have to decide if you're ready to face what comes next. She stepped forward, and with a flick of her wrist, the air between them seemed to shimmer. The room felt smaller now, the distance between them narrowing until all he could focus on was her presence, her power, and the undeniable pull that drew him closer to her with each passing moment. Ethan's heart beat faster as he stepped back, his mind racing. No going back. The gravity of the decision pressed down on him. Everything he had known, everything that had grounded him, seemed to be slipping away, piece by piece, into the unknown. This wasn't just some strange request from a woman he barely understood. No, it was something far bigger. His mind couldn't fathom it, but his body, his instincts, told him that this was real. Lyra's eyes darkened slightly, as if she knew the internal battle he was fighting. You are ready, Ethan. I know you feel it. A sudden gust of wind howled outside, rattling the windows and drawing Ethan's attention toward the snowstorm beyond. He wanted to say no. He wanted to turn his back on it all. But deep down, somewhere buried beneath the surface of his fears, he knew there was no other choice. Ethan turned back to her, his voice quiet but steady. If we fail, what happens? Lyra hesitated, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes betraying the calm facade she had held so far. She drew in a breath before speaking, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. If we fail, everything falls apart. My world, your world, everything you've ever known will unravel. The fabric of reality itself could be destroyed. The finality of her words hit him like a slap. The enormity of it all nearly brought him to his knees, but something in him wouldn't let him back down. Not now. And if we succeed? He asked, his voice carrying a hint of hope. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at him with a mixture of sadness and determination. She moved toward the small table where a map was spread out, a series of symbols and ancient markings he couldn't understand dotting the parchment. It's not about success, Ethan, she said, her fingers tracing the map with the same quiet precision she had used when touching him earlier. It's about the cost. There's always a cost. The bond between our worlds was broken, and we have to restore it before everything falls apart. But we can't do it alone. Ethan's gaze followed her fingers, tracing the lines and symbols, trying to make sense of them. But I don't understand. Why me? What do I have that could help? Lyra paused, and when she looked back at him, her eyes softened. Because you have what I don't. You have the power to trust. And that's what we need. The bond, it's not about strength, Ethan. It's about belief. And I need you to believe in this. She stepped closer, and for the first time since they had started this journey together, there was a tremor in her voice. I need you to believe in us. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The tenderness in her voice, the rawness of her plea, it unsettled him. He wanted to say something, anything, to reassure her. To push the weight of responsibility away. But he couldn't. Not now. Not when everything had already shifted. I don't know how to believe in this, he said, the words bitter in his mouth. How can I? How can I believe in something that doesn't make sense? You will, Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. You will. The room seemed to close in around him, the air thick with the weight of their unspoken truths. Ethan stood frozen, watching her, feeling as if the world were hanging in the balance. And maybe, in some way, it was. Finally, he exhaled, the weight in his chest somehow feeling lighter. Okay. Let's do it. Lyra's eyes sparkled with something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't joy. Not quite. But it was close enough. Good. We begin now. She stepped back and gestured toward the door. Follow me. Ethan hesitated, then followed her out into the swirling storm outside. The cold air hit him like a slap, but he didn't feel it. Not the way he should have. Lyra moved ahead, her silhouette cutting through the white landscape with effortless grace. She wasn't just leading him, she was pulling him into something far greater. A journey he couldn't turn back from. As they walked, the wind howled louder, almost as if the storm itself was urging them forward. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of his decision settled in. No going back. The words echoed again, but now, they didn't feel like a warning. They felt like a promise. And somewhere deep inside, he knew he was ready. Lyra turned to him as they reached the base of a cliff, her eyes steady. This is where it begins, Ethan. The moment we cross this threshold, we can never return to what we knew. Ethan looked out over the edge, the drop below nothing but a black abyss. For a moment, fear surged in him. But it wasn't the fear of danger. It was the fear of losing himself in this unknown, of failing at whatever it was that Lyra had asked him to do. But when he turned to her, he saw only certainty in her eyes. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he realized he trusted her. He stepped forward. Let's begin, he said, his voice steady, though his heart beat louder than ever. And together they crossed the threshold into the unknown,